World headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Right now, to what the Prime Minister had to say yesterday after it emerged that he, his wife and the Chancellor Rishi Sunak had been given a fixed penalty notice, fines for attending a lockdown party, specifically his own 56th birthday party, gathering, meeting, whatever you want to call it, back on the 19th of June 2020. Here is what the Prime Minister had to say yesterday.
I understand the anger that many will feel that I myself fell short when it came to observing the very rules which the government I lead had introduced to protect the public. And I accept in all sincerity that people had the right to expect better. And now I feel an even greater sense of obligation to deliver on the priorities of the British people.
So that's the Prime Minister saying sorry, but, you know, let's move on. He's talked about dealing with inflation, cost of living crisis and Ukraine. But does what he said yesterday tally with what he had to say to Parliament on the 8th of December last year?
Mr. Speaker, may I begin by saying that I understand and share the anger up and down the country at seeing Number 10 staff seeming to make light of lockdown measures. And I can understand how infuriating it must be to think that the people who have been setting the rules have not been following the rules, Mr. Speaker, because I was also furious to see that clip. And, Mr. Speaker, I apologise unreservedly for the offence that it has caused up and down the country, and I apologise for the impression that it gives. But I repeat, Mr. Speaker, that I have been repeatedly assured since these allegations emerged that there was no party and that no COVID rules were broken, and that is what I have been repeatedly assured. But I've asked the Cabinet Secretary to establish all the facts and to report back as soon as possible. And, Mr. Speaker, it goes without saying that if those rules were broken, then there will be disciplinary action for all those involved.
Well, that was what the Prime Minister was saying on the December the 8th. That's actually reference to a different party. That's a Bring Your Own Booze party. But does it all tally? Well, let's talk to Minister for Brexit Opportunities in the Cabinet, Jacob Rees Mogg, who joins us now. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
The Prime Minister has apologised. He said he's sorry, he understands the anger and frustration, but he's basically told us to move on. Can we move on with the Prime Minister, who's the first Prime Minister in British history to be given a fixed penalty notice to accept that he has committed a criminal offence while in office?
Well, hold on about fixed penalty notices. They've only existed since the 1980s. So
that's OK, then.
Walpole could not have been given a fixed penalty notice, nor could Gladstone, nor could Disraeli. So I think this suggestion about fixed penalty notices ignores the fact that they are relatively modern invention, and they are not an indication of a criminal offence.
Yes, they are. No, that's simply not true. Adam Wagner has been very, very clear. He's an expert on COVID lockdown rules, and he's very, very clear that the acceptance of paying the fine when you're issued with a fixed penalty notice for breaching lockdown rules is an admission of a criminal offence.
It's not a criminal offence. It isn't a criminal record. It hasn't gone through the magistrate's court. And this is important because you have to bear in mind that with fixed penalty notices, and this applies to other fixed penalty notices, you haven't been proved to be guilty as you would be in front of a court.
Then why has he paid the fine?
Oh, I mean, he's right to pay the fine.
So he's paid the fine even though he's not guilty?
No, what I'm saying is that you are putting it at a higher level than it factually is, and this reference to previous prime ministers who couldn't have got fixed penalty notices because they didn't exist.
Are you saying this is
completely irrelevant? Are
you saying that this is akin to getting 3 points on your licence?
I'm not making comparisons.
What is it comparable with?
I'm just pointing out what a fixed penalty notice is and why it couldn't have been given to dozens of previous prime ministers because they didn't exist within the British legal system.
I think we're going down a blind alley on that front. How serious is this? Because I'm old-fashioned and probably bizarrely more old-fashioned than you on this issue, Jacob Rees Mogg.
You're more old-fashioned than me. I've always thought of you as the epitome of fashion.
But I'm old-fashioned apparently in this country for thinking that A Prime Minister who brings in laws where he basically locks people in their homes, takes away all of our fundamental civil liberties because we're told it's because of COVID and a virus that could kill us. If he then breaks those rules, and who knows how many more fines he will face, this was just the first fine he may be facing for breaking those rules. And if he then lies about having broken those rules to Parliament, that he is unfit for public office. Why do you think he is still fit to serve as our Prime Minister?
Well, I think the Prime Minister has shown since 2019 that he is an extremely effective leader who gets the big decisions consistently right. And I think you need a country that is led by somebody who is capable of doing this. I think he got all the big decisions right in relation to Brexit, in ensuring Brexit was delivered. He got the big decisions right during the pandemic, and he's getting the big decisions right as a global leader at the moment.
I'm very happy about Brexit. I'm very, very proud of what Britain is doing when it comes to Ukraine. I think we are leading the world on that. However,
so you give him 2 out of 3. I know you disagree.
I do, but that's what I'm saying. I'm not coming from the perspective. I mean, look, Keir Starmer and Nicola Sturgeon will call for Boris Johnson to resign on a daily basis. You know, oh, it's Wednesday, let's call for him to resign. He's unfit for office. I don't start from that perspective in terms of what he's actually achieved. And indeed, I would fear that actually any other leader, we might still be in lockdown right now and would have been in lockdown all the way through last summer and indeed last winter as well. So, you know, credit where credit's due. So I'm not coming from a stance of like, oh, he has to go just because he's Boris Johnson. But we do have standards, or I thought we had standards in this country that particularly related to Prime Ministers having to be honest, at least to Parliament, if not to journalists, if not to voters. At least they had to be honest with Parliament. And when the Prime Minister was first asked about these various different parties, and we now know that 12 were being investigated by Sue Gray, 8 being investigated by the police, 6 of which we understand the Prime Minister himself attended. This is just possibly the first of 6 different fines, given that this birthday party was seen to be actually probably the least of the offences that had been committed. When he was first asked about this, he'd said, yeah, look, I did this. These were all the occasions. I'm really sorry. I was completely wrong. Maybe people would forgive him. But he first of all denied any knowledge of any parties. He said he was as horrified as everyone else was by the idea there had been parties. Then he said that he didn't think there had been parties. These were gatherings, they were work meetings. Then he said he wasn't at any. And then he said he was at them, but he didn't think there were parties. And now he's saying he wasn't aware that he was breaking the rules. He's changed his story about 5 times, and each one of those has been a lie.
Well, let's first of all consider what you were saying at the beginning of that paragraph, which is that you would rather have a worse leader of this country because of something that happened 2 years ago. Now, is that really in the national interest? Are you really saying to me that you would like a leader who would have kept us in lockdown longer, who might not have got the vaccine, who would be most unlikely to be a leader on the world stage, because somebody came into the Prime Minister's office and wished him happy birthday?
That's not what happened. That's not what happened. 30 people, including his wife and their interior decorator, got a cake and arrived for a party in the Cabinet room.
The Prime Minister was working throughout the day. He had 8 meetings in the day. He had been to visit a school. Mm-hmm. He was with all the same people he was working with throughout the day. Yes,
so was I, but I wasn't allowed to have parties with them.
And that, I think, is the key to your
Jacob, this is what I find absurd. And this is an argument given by lots of Cabinet Ministers and lots of Tory MPs, this argument that, but he was with the same people he was with all day. Yes, and so were millions of other people who were also working through that. But they were not allowed to have any gatherings. The law was very specific. It quite specifically stated you were allowed to have no gatherings at all, even a work meeting, unless it was specifically necessary for work. Meeting to have a cake and wish someone happy birthday was not necessary for work.
They were necessarily there for work, and at work wished him happy birthday. I think
they gathered to wish him happy birthday, not for a meeting.
I think we're into angels on a pinhead.
No, I don't think we are. I don't think we are.
No, I know you don't. That point's quite clear. But I think we are, because those people were all there. They were in the Cabinet room. The Prime Minister uses the Cabinet room as part of his office. It's right next door.
Was his interior decorator making decisions about policy at the time as well? Why was she there? Why was his wife there?
People who were working in your house were entitled to come to your house. You could have somebody come and mend your boiler.
Was she decorating the Cabinet room, was she?
If you have somebody coming to talk to you about decorating the property which is physically within the location that you are in. You don't. If somebody was mending your bathroom, you didn't have to speak to them only in the bathroom. That must logically
I thought the
follow.
Prime Minister was really busy during his working day, and yet for some reason had a work meeting with his interior decorator in the middle of the working day, in the middle of a pandemic. Really?
Even very busy people have to take care of their arrangements as well. Even someone as grand as you must have occasionally to consider.
I don't think I've ever had an interior designer
in your home environment.
Yeah. Well, let's look. You said, look, do we want to have a worse leader because of a decision that was made 2 years ago? The reality is, for a lot of people, it doesn't feel like it was 2 years ago. People remember like it was yesterday that they couldn't visit a loved one in hospital. They didn't get to say goodbye to someone who died, whether they died of COVID or not. By the way, those aren't the only people who died during that period. They had to cancel weddings. Their children didn't get birthday parties. They didn't meet their grandparents. They had their businesses closed. They missed out on the things that make life worthwhile. And yet, meanwhile, everyone in Number 10 was going to a party every Friday night.
I think this idea that was constant party in Number 10 is simply false.
There was.
The Prime Minister was at a few events which have been highlighted. He was not at boozy events.
Yes, he was.
No, he wasn't. Those events did not involve the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister was not in the building for those.
He attended the Bring a Bottle of Booze party in Number 10 Downing Street Garden.
He was in his own garden. He wasn't at boozy parties.
Oh, so would it have been okay if I'd had a Bring a Booze party at that time in my garden? No, of course not.
This is not what the Prime Minister's had a ticket for, so this isn't what we're talking about. We're talking about an event in the Cabinet Office. No one is trying to defend the event that took place on the eve of the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral, when people had drink at a farewell party, and the Prime Minister was not involved. He was, as I understand it, Chequers at the time. So I think one's got to be clear about
he was at 6 different events,
and that Downing Street is a large building where lots of people work. It is not, as I think some people think, the Prime Minister's private residence where people are constantly in his kitchen. It's not like that. It is an office building. But Julia, can I come on? Because I think there is an area of agreement between us on this, and I've said a couple of times publicly that I think it's really, really important that the inquiry looks into the balance of the rules, because I don't think it was right that people could not go and say farewell to a member of their family.
Did you say that at the time?
Who was dying. Well,
no, you didn't.
I didn't say it publicly.
You didn't say it at the time.
I didn't say it publicly, but I am bound by collective responsibility. And
did you say it at Cabinet?
I made my views clear. I don't think anyone was in any doubt of my views privately on the extent of lockdown.
This is the trouble, is that a lot of people now are going to say they were opposed to a lot of these rules, but they were happily, announcing these rules and enforcing these rules and cheering on when people got fines for these rules.
Yeah, but I never did any of that. I mean, you will remember the occasion where a couple of people out walking had a cup of coffee and were fined. It never seemed to me sensible to take that approach.
And yet you were part of a government that made that the law.
Well, actually, that fine was remitted because that was deemed to be a mistake. So, with all rules, there is a judgment as to what is the right level.
People were fined for sitting on park benches, for goodness sake. It was an insane time. And a lot of that insanity was perpetuated by people who claim now, 2 years after the fact, that, oh, no, I never agreed with that. Let me come to the issue a lot of people are saying about well, look, Prime Minister delivered Brexit. That's what he was elected to do in 2019, and we know that. He's also led the way on Ukraine. And as I say, very proud of what he's been doing there. And I wish other leaders had taken leaf out of his book. The argument being, I mean, the front page of the Mail makes this point, don't they know there's a war on? A lot of Tory MPs, a lot of cabinet ministers saying, look, we've got important jobs to do. Was it unwise for the French to have the first round of their presidential election, indeed their second round coming up in a week and a half's time, given that there is a war on in Europe? Was it unwise for the Americans to have their presidential election during COVID? Should we just suspend our standards because there's a war on?
I think we go back to your fundamental point, which is you want a worse leader of this country because you're cross and because the Prime Minister didn't follow your policy on COVID. That's what it boils down to. You've said this quite clearly. Really, your anger, your ire is directed at the Prime Minister because of lockdown in principle, which you opposed on your radio show throughout the period. You always thought it was wrong. And because now there's something that's come out that says that he made a mistake, you're saying, well, that's
he didn't make a mistake. He deliberately flouted laws that he had brought in for everyone else. That's not a mistake.
That is extraordinary overstatement. You are simply exaggerating the situation. A mistake was made.
A mistake? Did he accidentally stumble into a party? Did he stumble into 6 different parties?
That he didn't take your advice. And you are now saying you want a worse leader of this country.
You're saying a worse leader, Jacob Rees Mogg. You're saying if we don't have someone...
You're saying you want somebody who would be less good at dealing with the Western world in leading it in relation to Ukraine. Somebody who has a proved track record of getting the big decisions right, and you, because you're cross, want somebody worse.
Oh, I'm way beyond cross, Jacob.
Your listeners, it would be bad for the country. And would be bad for the world, actually, because we would then not have the global leadership that we need.
Jacob, I think it's an extraordinary lack of faith you're showing in your fellow cabinet and your fellow Tory MPs, that you think there is nobody in your entire selection of MPs who could be up for the Tory leadership and be Prime Minister of this country right now, who isn't a proven liar and hypocrite. You're saying that if we don't have Boris Johnson, there's not a single person in the cabinet who would lead on Ukraine.
Julia, your language is simply getting out of control.
Which bit was untrue?
Proven liar and hypocrite is simply wrong.
Isn't it?
Liar is a very
He said there weren't any parties, and he was at them.
Liar is a very strong word. A difference of opinion is not a lie.
He said there weren't any parties. He didn't know of any parties. He didn't attend any parties. That's not true. He perfectly reasonably thought that the events on his birthday were not a party, that he was there with all the same people he was with all day. Now, you and I disagree on this. You and I may differ in our interpretation, but lie is a very strong word. It's why it's not allowable in the House of Commons. Likewise, hypocrite is a very strong word, and I think you owe it to your listeners to use language moderately rather than these... I owe it to my listeners to always tell them what I really think.
Over-egged terms.
You genuinely believe that he did not lie when he said he was not at any parties, he knew of no parties and there were no parties.
He evidently did not lie.
I just don't think this is going to wash. Here's the thing. When we get to... I think the Prime Minister will survive right now. I think a lot of MPs are just waiting to see what the public think. And people will be in different views on this. Fundamentally, though, if we do get to the May local elections on the 5th of May, and if a lot of Tory voters... maybe don't vote Labour, maybe they will in the red wall seats, but they sit on their hands and show their disgust that way. They may not. You may be right. I may be in the minority on this, but that's not what the polls suggest I am. But what happens then? Do the Tories suddenly discover their moral backbone?
The Tories maintain their moral backbone at all times. I've consistently thought that the Prime Minister is the right person to lead this country. I've backed him for a long time. His decision-making capabilities show that he is the right leader for this country, and he will be judged by his successes. The current issue he has to tackle is the cost of living crisis. That will be the big test for a general election when it eventually comes. That's the issue of today.
OK. And just finally, he's being investigated over 6 of the 8 parties being investigated by the police. If he has to pay a fine for any more of those parties, perhaps even all 6, will you still be saying the same thing?
The Prime Minister is an exceptional leader. It is rare in the history of this country that we have a truly exceptional Prime Minister. And we have got one, and he is worth supporting, and he continues to be worth supporting. That is in the interest of the nation, as you even agreed earlier in this interview. And I think, therefore, one has to get a sense of proportion. What is in the national interest? Boris Johnson is in the national interest.
It's an interesting day to be on air. It really is. We've got calls for the Prime Minister and the Chancellor to resign. We've got demands for Parliament to be recalled, claims that, well, we've got a war on, we can't do anything. And a first Prime Minister in British history ever to be convicted of a criminal offence, because that's what it is when you get a fixed penalty notice for breaking a law under lockdown and you pay that fine. You are accepting, yes, you did commit an offence, and that is what both the Prime Minister and the Chancellor and also the Prime Minister's wife, Carrie Johnson, admitted doing when they attended the Prime Minister's 56th birthday party on the 19th of June 2020. I think we all know what we were doing around June 2020, as we can remember pretty much every single long, boring, miserable, heartbreaking day of that first lockdown, because we all remember the parties we missed, the meetings we missed, the work we missed, the holidays we missed, the birthdays, the funerals, the weddings, all of life's, well, meaningful events were cancelled. And we were told they had to be cancelled because we'd all die otherwise, wouldn't we? And anyone who breached those rules was a COVID idiot, was selfish, was a granny killer, a COVID denier. Any other names that we can shout at people? But while those laws were made by the Prime Minister, endorsed by the Prime Minister at a press conference almost nightly from number 10 Downing Street, he and his staff, we now know, were not just attending a birthday party, not an impromptu one, by the way. There was a cake. There were 30 people in the room. That's not impromptu. They were also attending boozy night after boozy night. The Metropolitan Police, after saying, first of all, oh, there was really nothing at all for them to investigate, finally dragged kicking and screaming to investigate. They decided, actually, there were parties worth investigating. Sue Gray, carrying out an investigation inside Whitehall, said there were 12 parties that she knows of. 8 are being investigated by the police, and the Prime Minister is believed to have attended 6 of them. This is just the first fine he's got. There may be, it is very likely, 5 more. One of the parties he's alleged to have attended was in his own flat. I'm not entirely sure how he's going to square the I was at work gov defence there. And here where we get to the rub. Because the Prime Minister says that, lessons have been learned. He's offered an unreserved apology and says that people have the right to expect better, and says he deeply regrets the frustration and anger caused. He says, I am sorry. But is he sorry for having broken the rules? Is he sorry for getting caught for breaking the rules? Is he sorry that he brought in rules that he didn't know about? And is he sorry that the rest of us obeyed all of those rules? OK, maybe you, maybe other people, maybe me, who knows? Maybe people did break a little rule here and there. But the difference is we weren't making the rules. And remember, every single time you think of this, he and everyone else who attended those back get-togethers in number 10 didn't worry that they were fearing for their lives when they got together. They knew they were perfectly safe. They knew no one was going to die when they got together. And yet they banned the rest of us from doing it. Is it time for the Prime Minister to go? Well, they have many saying there's a war on. Of course he can't go. An argument bizarrely not used when the French held their elections. Well, we're still dealing with COVID. Bizarrely not an argument used when the Americans had their elections and elected a new president in the height of the pandemic. And we're told that, well, there isn't really an alternative. But you know what? If there really isn't an alternative to a Prime Minister who has lied and lied again to us and to Parliament, then what does that say about our democracy? What does it say about Britain? I have no beef with Boris Johnson. He delivered Brexit. Brilliant. I think he has performed magnificently over Ukraine. Absolutely brilliant. I'm so proud of what we have done there. But I'm not proud of having a Prime Minister who has lied to Parliament, and he did. I'm not proud of a Prime Minister who's made laws he didn't believe in, forced them on us, and then broke them himself, and is only sorry because he's got caught. I'm afraid if we believe in anything in this country, we must believe in some fundamental principles of honesty and integrity. And if our Prime Minister doesn't have those, if he's proven not to have those, how can he continue to lead this country?
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.